but we are so very thankful to have with us the General Superintendent of the United Pentecostal Church, Bishop David K. Bernard. And we're also just as equally thankful to have his lovely wife, Sister Connie Bernard, as well. Let's give them a warm welcome. God bless you as you minister to us today. We love you.
Please be seated. Well, praise the Lord, everybody. It's great to be back in Michigan, and sounds like you've already been enjoying a good conference or retreat, so we're glad to join you. And we've been asked to talk about marriage, so I'll start. The way we usually do it is I'll start, and then my wife just interjects whenever she feels the spirit, whether it's a capital S or a small s. But there's so much we could talk about. I'd really like to deal with what you're interested in. So we're going to try to open it up for questions pretty early, comments, questions. Obviously, we don't want to do any marriage counseling right here, so I don't want any detailed scenario, but you could be asking for a friend. But anyway, but just some concepts maybe related to ministry, marriages in particular. So I'll make some general comments because I believe, of course, it's always helpful for all of us. Marriage is the kind of thing you're never really fully an expert, because just when you think you've got it all settled, life changes. You go through seasons of life, so you kind of have to renegotiate your relationship continually, because what works at one stage doesn't necessarily work at the next stage. And sometimes you think, well, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to, everything we agreed to, and now all of a sudden the rules have changed. But that's because you're dealing with a unique human being, and that's because life continues to change and evolve. So just for background, we've been married 44 years. I started full-time ministry at the same time we got married. So we got married, and then 2 weeks later, we moved to start full-time ministry. We have 3 children that are all grown and married, and they're all pastoring. And we have 8 grandchildren, and we think we could even have more. Who knows? So that's fine with us. Okay, and also I realize that not only is it's beneficial no matter how long you've been married, it's always good to get a refresher or a review, but also many of you are probably leading younger ministers, and it's one thing to pretty well feel like you know what you're doing and things are pretty successful, but it's another thing to articulate to a younger minister, especially one who might be having some struggles or unusual circumstances. And so what I'm going to say hopefully relate to each one of you, but also knowing that you are leaders and pastors, you'll be mentoring others who are in ministry or entering ministry or even lay leaders. So to get started, Genesis 2:24, I'll use the New King James. And of course, this is the institution of marriage, which actually came before the church. But Genesis 2:24, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So here's a biblical definition of a marriage. The King James says cleave to his wife. This says joined to his wife. The unusual thing about cleave, it's one of those English words can mean the opposite of itself. Cleave can mean to join together. It can mean to split apart. The context has to tell you which. But here's the biblical definition of marriage, 3 components. A public leaving, so you're leaving your former family, changing your priorities, and that's why we have a wedding ceremony, and that's why we say there must be a legal marriage recognized by the state. It has to be a public leaving, and then to follow the King James, a public cleaving. There has to be a joining together of mind, soul, and spirit, and one flesh. There's the consummation of the marriage, which is physical union as well as emotional and spiritual. So if you have some people live together, they're joined, but that's not a public leaving and a public cleaving. It's not the lifelong commitment. And then there are cases where somebody goes to the ceremony, but they never consummate it. That's not a fully valid marriage either, because you have to finalize what you pledged. So that's where we start. And then also I'd like to read from 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7. This is addressing the husbands. They are the head of the household. But notice what it says, 1 Peter 3:7. Husbands, likewise dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. There's a lot packed in there, but the key thing is heirs together. So essentially, I view marriage as a partnership. It's a partnership of equals. The roles are different. We understand that. The husband is supposed to take the leadership, but that's not a dictatorial leadership. That's not his decision trumps all other decisions. In fact, if he takes that approach, his prayers will be hindered. So if he doesn't have the right relationship with his wife, he's not going to have a right relationship with God. And actually, of course, you can discuss the passage in Ephesians, the wife submit to her husband. That simply means follow his godly leadership. But here it says the husband should give honor to his wife. So if it were an unequal relationship, you don't give honor to a servant. You don't give honor to your kid. You don't give honor to someone who's under you, so to speak. You give honor to someone who's your equal, or in some cases more. And the weaker vessel, I think, is just a simple statement, a generality. Most women are not as physically strong or large as a man, and so a man could take advantage of a woman typically. And so we're not to do that. We're to recognize a woman is not intellectually weaker or spiritually weaker, sometimes maybe stronger, but the husband, the man, needs to understand the limitations of his wife physically, and not presume that just because he's strong enough to do something that his wife should automatically do the same thing he does, but understand that her makeup is different. And so, again, heirs together of the grace of life. And I think this helps us regarding ministry, because we're involved in ministry. We're involved in receiving God's grace and ministering God's grace. And if we're going to do that as a married person, we have to do it with understanding of our spouse and being partners in everything we do. Now, some people say a partnership is 50-50. Actually, it's 100-100. Because sometimes you'll be given 100%, sometimes your spouse will be given 100%. Hopefully, in the long run, it evens out. But it's not, everything is not a negotiation where I get 50% of what I want, she gets 50% of what she wants. No, sometimes I have to give her 100% of what she wants, because that's what's needed in that. So we're not bargaining, we're not keeping score, we're not keeping track. We're just working together to make our marriage successful and our family successful, but also our ministry successful, because our prayers will be hindered. Now, there's an old school thinking that, since God is first, then all aspects of ministry are first. And I've even talked to some elders and talked to children of elders and others who felt like, well, ministry always comes, since God comes first, ministry always comes first. So they would sacrifice their family or their children or their spouse, the personal time, because God comes first. Well, obviously, God comes first in the sense of serving God. So if your family doesn't want you to serve God, you still serve God. But part of your ministry is your ministry to your family. So if you are a husband or a wife, you have a ministry responsibility to your spouse. If you have children, you have a ministry responsibility to your children. So don't pit other forms of ministry against that ministry. In fact, I would say that ministry must come first. So, for example, you're planning to do something Monday night with your family, but somebody has an urgent need. They need you right now. Does that trump your family night? The old school is yes, ministry 24/7. But I would say no. I would say in this case, your ministry to your family is more important. So teaching Bible studies is important, yes. But you could always get one more Bible study. Whatever day you have off, you could always fill it with one more Bible study or one more counseling session. But that's not the will of God for you to neglect your family ministry just for one more external ministry opportunity. And I know of some kids that have said, I wish my father, I love my father, admire my father, his hard worker. I wish he would have treated us as good as he treated the saints of the church. Because if the saints call, drop everything and go run and take care of it. If the kids had needs, well, that could always be deferred to another time. If we're not careful, what is urgent can crowd out what's important. So if I ask you what's most important, you would probably say, outside your personal relationship with God, you would probably say your marriage and your children. But if we're not careful, if we don't guard our time, all the urgent needs of everybody else, it's everybody else's emergencies. And we say, well, I can always reschedule dinner with my family because I have them all the time. I can always reschedule that date with my wife because I have her all the time. But if that's the attitude, those urgent things will keep coming up, and you'll keep pushing off week after week, month after month. What you claim is the most important will be crowded out by what's urgent. But you have to learn sometimes that what's an emergency to someone else is not necessarily an emergency to you, at least not in the sense of sacrificing other priorities. And I would just say one practical thing there is I always use my calendar. I'd sit down with my wife. We would put a date night in the calendar. We'd put family night. Of course, when the kids were small, every Monday night was our family night. And we made that a blanket rule for the church. We would never schedule any church activity that people were obligated to come to unless it was a recreational activity that they could do with their family. There was a positive family event. And we took that time to have some type of recreation or games and also a family devotional. And so we guarded that. And, somebody might call and say, Brother Bernard, Pastor, we need to talk to you tonight. And, of course, I'm thinking, we're getting a divorce. And I'm thinking, well, you've been headed this way for 5 years, so one more night is not going to make a difference. So, but I would say, well, let me check my calendar. And I'd come back and say, well, I'm sorry, I already have another appointment that time. I didn't have to say there's a date with my wife. But I would say, can you wait one more night? I do have tomorrow night or tomorrow afternoon. Can you just wait? Can you just promise me you're not going to kill each other for one more night? And if you can't make that promise, then wife, you go to your mom's house tonight. But tomorrow night, we will definitely get together. So you have to manage those emergencies and crises. Now, there are exceptions. I had a new convert call me, Pastor Bernard, I need you to talk to my husband right now. It was late at night. I said, what's going on? She said, he's trying to beat me up. I pulled a knife on him. I need you to tell him if he comes any closer, I'm going to stab him with the knife. I said, okay, I'll take the call. That's not the one I felt like I could reschedule. But you do need to guard your time, guard your schedule. You need to have a family strategy, and you need to keep that strategy. So maybe, I don't want to keep going on too long. Do you have anything to interject?
You're doing great. I will say we had to always work in tandem. As the kids got older, they would be involved with things also. So we still had to protect our family time. But I think raising them in that environment that they knew that they were priority and family was a priority, that they realized that that would always be the foundation for whatever we did in life, is that our family came first. And I think they gained ownership of that at a very early age, and I'm thankful, but it was very intentional. There were many times that it cost something to schedule these times, but it's worth it for your family. And we've seen so many situations that the kids wish they could go back and really have more family time with their minister parents. So it is very, very vital and very important.
And, of course, children are a vital part of your relationship, even after they're all grown. Of course, I left home at age 17. I was raised in Korea, so at 17 I came back to go to college. So I kind of half jokingly told my kids, when you turn 18, you're moving out of the house, you're on your own. Unless you're going to college, we might help you, but I expect you to take care of yourself. And if you do stay at home, I expect you to pay rent. Of course, my wife is saying, no, baby, you can stay as long as you want. It doesn't matter. But with my boys, that was my attitude. Of course, with my girl, that wasn't my attitude. With the boys, I was relieved when they finally got married, because then we thought, okay, they're probably going to be all right. They're probably not going to mess up. They're probably not going to destroy their ministry. They're safe. But with my girl, I don't know if anybody can be a good enough husband for my daughter. So that we had to struggle with that. Of course, the way he got around that is he got my wife to like him first before my daughter
On his
did.
defense, I liked him before he realized that she was a catch.
So he was able to outmaneuver me that way. But it's worked out so far. So, but I will say with the children, you have to be careful, because my philosophy was I did not want to promote them excessively. I did not want to penalize them excessively. I did not want to promote them excessively so that they would have an entitlement or prima donna mentality. So when our church was small, we were home missions. We didn't have any musicians. My wife trained. She's a keyboardist, so she trained her oldest son to be a bass player. She trained our second son to be a drummer, and my daughter was a singer. And so they were the best in the church. And of course, they could run the whole music program. But from an early time, we tried to train others as well. And we put people on a rotation. Even though my son was the best bass player by far, we rotated once we had enough to do that.
Do you remember the Sister Bess that bought the organ for the church and played the organ for the church, and no one else played that organ in that church? I'm just saying.
So, but my wife was the best keyboardist and the one I would want for the altar call, but we started rotating that as well. First of all, I wanted to train more people. But second, I didn't want them to think our family is going to preempt everything, that our kids always have to have the solo or always have to have the star role in the play. On the other hand, if they worked hard and earned something, I did not want to stop them from I would not intervene to give them something, but as people wanted to use them and recognize them, I did not prohibit that either. So I think there's a balance where you want your kids to grow up not feeling entitled, but having a love for ministry. You don't want them to resent the church. If you force them to do everything, then they could go up to resent the church. So we asked them to participate as other saints did, but there were some things that if they didn't want to go and participate, we did not try to make them because they're the preacher's kid. There's a temptation to say, but you're the pastor's kid, you have to be a good example. Or other people would say that. But I tried never to pull the pastor card. If there was something I felt like they needed to do, I would say, we're Christians. We need to do this because we're good Christians. And if they argued with me, well, other people in the church, you're not making them do that, then I would say this is our family's commitment. This is what we've decided as a family, what we're going to do and not do. But I tried never to say, you have to do this because you're my kid and you'll be a bad example and I'll get criticized by other people. I never did that. I tried never to pull that card, but only I'm asking you to do this. And this is, as they get older, teenagers, you have to start letting them make their own decisions, even in a safe environment. Not sinful decisions, but decisions that, of Christian liberty or things you would like them to do, but are you going to force them to do everything? The default is to say no. Anything they want to do, especially the boys, could be risky. You could always find good reasons why they probably shouldn't do that. And I begin realizing, every time they come asking me for something, my answer is no. I need to say yes, but. I need to figure out a way to say yes, but under certain conditions. Or if it's really something horrible, then I can say no. But I need to choose my battles wisely, okay? You can't win every battle, even if you're the parent. And so anyway, but getting back, I think that's closely related to marriage, because a lot of times the conflicts between husband and wife can be over how to handle situations with the kids. And so you have to really guard that. And let's talk a little bit about conflict. Some people say they never have a conflict. Well, first of all, I don't believe them. And second of all, I think one of them's doing all the thinking and the other one is not thinking. Because if you're two intelligent human beings, you're both spiritually minded, you're co-equal partners, you're going to have disagreements. So the problem is not having a disagreement. The problem is having how you have the disagreement. And I say that you have to learn how to fight fair. And when I say fight, that's in quotation marks. I will say absolutely there is no justification for physical abuse or physical intimidation. Submission does not mean that. That's a distortion. And I'll just say this, physical abuse is far more common than we would like to think, even in the church. And I think it's good to make statements periodically to your whole church that we do not believe in physical abuse or physical violence. If that's a factor, it has to be addressed with external counseling. It doesn't get better on its own. And I speak from experience as well as research that even though a person may be sincere and apologetic and repentant and crying, unless there's outside intervention and accountability, it's going to happen again. So if there's even a tendency, sometimes it can be a physical intimidation, because a man can be much bigger and stronger and just physically loom over your spouse. You have to be careful that there's no hint of physical violence. If there is, you got to get help, and you got to get external help. I would likewise say yelling, screaming, cursing, name-calling, belittling, hateful remarks, that should never be allowed. That's verbal intimidation or psychological intimidation. And some people, now, it can happen either way, but 95% of partner or spouse abuse is a man abusing the woman. It does happen the other way. But a lot of times men, especially in church, they know they can't do that, but they can, with their words, tear people down and destroy them. And so we have to realize that is wrong as well. So we have to put that off limits. So when we talk, we have to talk reasonably and respectfully. We know how to do it with everybody else, right? I mean, we know not to yell and scream at our boss or at our pastor, or, so we know how to do it. You can't say, well, she provoked me, or she pushed my buttons, or I'm really a nice person, but I was pushed beyond my limit. Well, how does that work with your boss? How long do you keep your job that way? So we learn how to do it with everybody else. We ought to learn how to do it with the people we love the most. So there's a time, I do say this, if there's a real intense conflict, either spouse ought to have the right to ask for a timeout. And what I mean by that is some people like to talk and they keep pushing, want a resolution. And you can't always get a resolution, especially when you're emotionally upset. So either spouse has to be able to say, I don't want to talk about it right now, it's too intense. But that can't be a dodge to say, I'll never deal with it. Right. It has to be a promise, give me some space and time, let's talk about it tomorrow. Yeah. Or let's go to the pastor, or let's go to a counselor, or let's go, or I need to take a walk, I need to take a drive. I need to cool off. I need a couple hours of my own. I need to pray, or we need to pray. Either spouse ought to be able to say, I call a timeout and I call for a time, and that should be respected. And I would also say, if at all possible, and this comes from Ephesians, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Don't go to bed angry. Now, you may not be able to resolve the underlying point that night, but at least you can say, I'm sorry I got upset. I know we disagree, but I do love you. We're going to work this out. We won't be able to work it out tonight, but I just want you to know I love you, and we'll figure out a way. We'll get this settled. Because if you go to bed angry, it can tend, first of all, it affects your relationship right there, but it also tends to become a grudge. It becomes that much harder to resolve it. It becomes harder to apologize when you let it fester. So those are some basic rules of fighting fear. I can give some more, but a lot of it just goes back to respect, kindness, love, and treating your spouse better than yourself. And again, I do believe the husband is the leader. I look at it like this: authority equals responsibility. This is a general principle in life. Whatever God gives you the responsibility to do, he gives you the corresponding authority to do it. So God gives the primary responsibility to the husband. You're to provide, protect, and care for your family. And of course, we live in a modern society where physical strength is not as important, but if you go back to ancient times, the husband was needed to do the manual labor to provide for the family. The husband was needed to physically protect the family against wild animals and what have you. So God gave the husband the leadership role to do his job. That doesn't mean he can do whatever he wants. No authority is absolute except God's authority. So all of our authority is subject to God's will. And of course, the wife is to follow that godly leadership. But for 99% of the time, it's not going to be pulling the trump card. Well, I'm the husband, so let's end this argument by doing what I say. Most of the time, it's going to be negotiated. And if it's not important to you, let the other spouse decide. That's a good rule there. Whoever it's most important for, let them decide. So 90% of the time, if it's a major decision, we're going to talk about it, we're going to pray about it till we both agree. And if we don't agree, that's a good sign. We probably don't need to be making that decision yet. I suppose we could have a disagreement. At the end, I could say, you know what? As the husband, I really feel like this is what we should do. I feel like this is what the Lord wants to do. My wife would say, fine. But if once a week we have a disagreement, and once a week it ends by me saying, well, I am the husband, how long do you think that's going to work? It's not going to work. Because every time you do that, you're spending influence. Influence is like money in the bank. You have a limited amount. And if you spend it all, when you really need it, it's not going to be there. So we can't think in terms of who gets to order who around, who gets to decide. It's really a partnership. And a partnership, even a partnership has to have somebody that's the managing partner or the leading partner. But that should be negotiated. For some families, the husband is the better financial manager. For the others, the wife is. So whatever your strengths are, you defer to one another. It's not that because you're the husband, you're supposed to do these 10 things. Really, almost everything is negotiable based on aptitude, likes, dislikes, and that may change over time. When you have small kids at home, the wife has to be the primary nurturer. But as kids grow and leave the home, a lot of things change in the relationship. And that was what I was referring to earlier, is that sometimes the circumstances have changed, but we're still trying to act like 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And you can't do that. You have to modify the way you're acting. Okay, I don't want to keep going. I'm sure you have some things you'd like to say.
Well, one thing, a lot of times you may be trying to make decisions, and not on the life decisions, but daily decisions. And sometimes it's okay. We've just come to a point where sometimes it's okay to agree to disagree, because you're two different people and you're coming from two different family dynamics. So you're not going to think alike, and it's okay to have a different opinion. But you do that with love, and do it with still respecting one another, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think what she's saying, there are a lot of times you can go ahead and it's not something horrible or sinful or detrimental. You don't have to agree. We're all going to do everything the same way. Maybe one night she does one thing and I do another thing. That's okay, within reason, as long as you obviously prioritize your marriage. I would like to stress interdependence. So 1 Corinthians 11, which talks about a distinction in hair between male and female. So God definitely has a distinction in mind. He wants us to maintain that distinction in our outward appearance. We all believe that. But in that same passage, he talks about how God created the man first, then the woman, and he goes right around and says, but the man comes from the woman. So yes, the God created the first man first, and he brought the woman out of the first man, but every man since that has come out of a woman. So he's basically saying it's interdependence. The main point is mutuality. There's a distinction in God's plan, but it's mutual. 1 Corinthians 7 talks about the husband does not own his own body, but his wife has authority over his body, and vice versa. And it's talking about the sexual relationship, how there should be mutuality. And so even the passage that talks about submission starts in Ephesians 4:21, submitting to one another in love. So there are different roles, but the whole context is partnership, mutuality, interdependence, not independence. So it's not as if the husband is independent and the wife is dependent. It's that both are mutually interdependent. And the role of the husband is different from that of the wife. The role of the father is different from that of the mother. Here's a simple illustration that I like to use. I remember our oldest son was maybe, 12 years old. We had this huge oak tree in the backyard. Well, he was climbing almost to the very top. So I go out there and look. I say, way to go, Jonathan. You're almost at the top. But now, that branch is small. Look to your left. There's a strong branch there. That will be safe. And I'm coaching him. My wife comes out, sees that. Get down at once. You're going to kill yourself. Well, kids need both, don't they? And personality is different, so this is a stereotype. But the father is often encouraging. You can do it. Take a risk. You can do more. And the mother's often saying, be careful. I'm here to take care of you. I don't want you to risk too much. Well, really, the kids need both of those statements. They need to learn how to balance that out, and they need to learn how to make their own decisions in life. And that's why it's not God's will to have two moms or two dads. And if there's a single parent, God can make, if life happens, God and the church can make up the difference. So, we're not attacking those who have less than ideal circumstances, but when we can fulfill God's will, it's always the best. And so we have to keep that in mind, that our roles are going to be different. Sometimes we are going to think different. Sometimes our advice is going to be different. And that's not necessarily bad as long as we have a united front towards the kids, and as long as we work out any differences ourselves and come up with a reasonable course of action. And as I said earlier, sometimes that means my opinion prevails. Sometimes it means her opinion prevails. Sometimes that means the two of us figure out something that's better than either of us had before. And that's all part of the process. So maybe we should open for some questions. We've touched on a number of subjects. Does anybody have a question or a comment or want us to elaborate? I'd be happy to do that. Or you could ask my wife. Does somebody have a mic out there? Don't be shy. I know you don't want to. We understand you're asking in general, not specifically about you. But for a friend.
For a
Yes.
friend. It's that friend asking.
Not directly related, I guess, to like specifics with marriage, but what is a book that you find that you recommend the most that probably, maybe if you're a reader, people know about it, but maybe a unique book as well that talks about marriage that you find that you recommend a lot?
Right now, I'm reading one. It's not specifically on marriage, but it's called Soul Care. And just a friend of mine suggested it to me. Actually, sent it to me. I was dealing with my father's death and my mom's cancer, and felt just overwhelmed. And I reached out to her, and it talks about really taking care of yourself, because that's part of being a healthy marriage, is that you're taking care of yourself also. It's called Soul Care, SOUL Care. It's a really good book. It's not a apostolic writer, but it's from a counselor, and I'm enjoying it just in different ways. And I'm very big on taking care of yourself. When I speak anywhere, I'm talking about more practical things, and I tell people, you better believe what you do day in and day out is very spiritual. But we do have to take care of ourselves, and in all ways. It's not just a physical, about the physical care. And I'm finding how it's helping me to balance things even more in this season that we're in. So you may have another.
There are several new books out of Pentecostal Publishing House, Pentecostal Resources Group. They've started a new initiative called Healthy Homes. So you might look at some of their books. One recently that I'm thinking of, I can't remember the title, but is it Keith and Laura? Is that a Payne?
Yes.
Payne, Payne. They have a new book on marriage and family from the Pentecostal Publishing House. You can go to pentecostalpublishing.com and search their name. And as I said, the actual title of the book escapes me for a moment, but that's a brand new book that I found to be helpful and useful.
And that whole research, the whole Healthy Families, they have a lot.
Yes. They've got a lot of good resources. This Healthy Homes, and they're different books by all United Pentecostal authors. They've been coming out with some new ones recently that I think are excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, this is maybe a question for both of you, but ministry can be so demanding, and the two of you have probably lived the epitome of that. But what would you recommend for ministry marriages, for times to get away, to get away from ministry, away from all of the demands, and to spend time together, maybe even frequency or things to do?
Yes. Well, let me just tell you several things, and this, of course, is a big passion of my wife, so I'm sure she's going to have some things to say. But what I try to do, first of all, is one day off a week. I know if you're working bivocationally, that may be a challenge, but maybe 2 half days. You got to have, I think the Sabbath principle, we're not under the law, but I think the Sabbath principle is still applicable. And of course, Sunday is not really our Sabbath day. That's our work day. So you have to, and so when I was full-time, I supported myself, but I had flexible hours. So I took Monday off, and I said, nobody call me unless it's a genuine emergency. I'm available the rest of the week. I'll answer the phone, or I'll return calls. My secretary will answer and contact me, but not on Monday. That's my day. And then Monday night, we had our family night. So every Monday night, of course, my wife usually would pray with the kids before they went off to school. But Monday night, we would choose a family recreation. So whether it's going skating or bowling or games at home, and always a family devotion. In our family devotion, we would read a little Bible-based story and a scripture. I'd talk briefly about it, and I would ask each kid to go around the room, give me one testimony of what God did for you this week. And I had each kid go around the room, one prayer request. And those things were often very eye-opening, because they would share things that we didn't know they knew. Like, a kid in my classes in Sunday schools, her parents are getting a divorce. Of course, we might have known about it, but we didn't know they knew. So please pray for my friend. So that was not a lengthy time, but it was a set-aside time. We also try to eat dinner every night, unless I was out of town. But dinner was our time. And even today, our kids will tell you that was some of the best times. And we did not allow phones at that time. Then we also planned an annual family vacation. And even today, we keep that. Now, when our church was small, my idea of a family vacation was we had Sunday night service. So Sunday night, we drive out of town. Saturday night, we drive back in town. Because I could not miss one weekend, because there might be a first-time visitor. There might be a new convert that would backslide if I wasn't there to counsel them. My wife said,
Hallelujah.
I told you she would have something to say. So my wife finally convinced me, you're not taking a vacation, because around Wednesday, you're already worried about what you're going to preach on. If you don't take at least one weekend off, if you don't go 9 or 10 days or 2 weeks, you're not taking a vacation. So we did start doing that. And as much as possible, people going to the hospital, people dying. We tried not to break that vacation. There may have been once or twice we had to do that, but as much as possible, we tried to push it off. Now, I have minister friends. They will not have one family dinner without being interrupted 5 times talking to saints. In a restaurant, get up and walk out and talk to saints. I don't do that. So when we had, and also Thanksgiving and Christmas became very big for us, family traditions, family holiday times, time off. Even today, we try to get all of our kids coming Thanksgiving one year and all of them coming Christmas the next year. So that way they can coordinate that with their in-laws, assuming, we're all in different cities. But my wife will do this. We're having dinner or family night together. Sometimes she'll get a box and she'll go around and collects all the cell phones and put them in the bedroom and say, no cell phones are available for 2 hours. I mean, before there were cell phones, somehow we survived.
That's when they were younger, like the teenager years. And now they're in the mode to where they don't want to bring the phones to the table because they value that family time. But it was fun. Even nieces and nephews, I'd decorate that box and say, put them in here, everybody, and I'd put them in a bedroom, up in a closet, shut the door, shut the bedroom door, couldn't hear a thing. There was always one emergency phone, but it was a time that they realized that we valued, and now they value that time just as much.
So to finish the question, so we had an annual family vacation. We had special times at Thanksgiving, Christmas. But in addition to that, my wife and I, we would try to have date nights regularly, and we would also have getaway times like 2 days, 3 days, just a short weekend. Or if we're traveling overseas or we're traveling to a special place like Michigan, we might take 2 extra days at some interesting place, just tack it on.
Like where the grandkids are.
Yeah.
Wherever that is.
So, but we always did that. We took opportunities. And if we went through a really difficult time, sometimes we say, you know what? We need to go somewhere for 2 days. And we would just do that. So, yeah.
And sometimes if you both are working secular jobs, that's extra hard. And sometimes in your mind, you might think, oh my goodness, we just need to get a week away. Sometimes just a night away that you can block off. And it doesn't have to cost a lot of money, but just getting away from situations, and it helps. And I tell ministers' wives this all the time. You may not have a half a day. You may not have a day to be able to get away. But just go somewhere quiet. Just go to an area that you enjoy, if it's a river or a picnic area or a park or something. And just spend some time. And I'm going to be super unspiritual, but you don't even have to be praying at that time. Just give yourself a moment to breathe. And sometimes you can, if you pull away even for an hour, it kind of gives you a different perspective. Say, okay, I've got this. I can do this. We can get by with a lot less. Not that we need to, but there are times when your schedule's so crazy and you feel like if you don't get away, you're just going to explode. Well, don't explode. Pull away, and just find the little short moments that you can do that. And it does make a difference. It really does.
Different people respond to different things, hobbies. And I think hobbies and sports and recreation, they're all valuable. But whatever works for you. But there is something about the way God created us that getting out in nature is very soothing. So I like to go, I just developed a little hobby of taking pictures of wildflowers, and I try to analyze why. That's because it doesn't take all day and it doesn't take a lot of money, but I can go to a park or the woods or some wildlife area just for 2 hours, but I'm having to, and I do this with bird watching too, you have to focus your attention to find that. So you can't be thinking about your problems. You can't be talking on your phone. You're immersed, and you're immersed in nature. I also like to play racquetball. It doesn't take all day, but it's intense workout, hour and a half. And you have to focus. You can't be worried about everything else. And to the extent you are frustrated, you just hit the ball as hard as you can. And that relieves your frustrations, because part of that game is the harder you hit it, the better off you are. So,
One time he was playing racquetball, and of course he had the goggles on and got hit by a ball or a racket.
It was a racket.
A racket, pretty hard. Well, the general board meetings were going on. I was flying in the next morning, so in getting ready, I jammed my toe into the corner baseboard and broke my toe. So, which was not the first one, but I put a boot on. I mean, I went to emergency care, put a boot on. So I come into headquarters with a boot on, and he has a black eye. So all the general board members are saying, "Oh, we know what's going on here." But Brother Cox from Louisiana said, "Sister Bernard, I got your back. I know you did not do that."
Of course, I just said, look, for all the speculation, which injury is the offensive one and which is the defensive one?
Lawyer, lawyer, lawyer.
But I do recommend that you have some kind of hobby or some kind of recreation or some kind of sport that gets your mind engaged. And I will say this, you don't do it for that, but you can see the reason. Sometimes my most creative thoughts come when I'm on vacation or I'm doing recreation, and then thoughts start popping into my head because you're not focused on the immediate problems or the immediate task, but your mind is relaxing, it's going free, you're daydreaming. And then whether it's your own creativity or the Lord can get your attention maybe in an unexpected time. You're spending a day out, on a lake or something, then you have time to slow down. One more thing, which my wife convinced me of, it took 40 years to get there or close to it. But in 2021, we took a month sabbatical. So I didn't know if we could do it, but we arranged everything to do it, and it was successful. And so now in February of 2026, we're going to do that again, a month sabbatical. So,
Can I
yes.
say, as a wife, part of our job is to, if I can say it the right way, be the caregiver, protector of our husband, and his health is such an important part of that. And when COVID hit, we were shut down for 8 weeks in Austin. He caught the last flight out of Canada, and then they shut the airport down to get home. And that first 4 weeks, I noticed him slowly resting. And you can go on adrenaline for so long and get just a little nap here and a nap there and keep on going because you're on a mission from God, which is very valuable. It's a calling, I understand that. But I noticed how weary he was in that time. And so those 8 weeks made me realize this is you need that rest time, and you can't all take a month sabbatical. Maybe you can and you have to plan it. But I realized how valuable rest really is. And can I just interject here? I am the one that said you really need to be off a Sunday. And we mentioned this to a couple, pastor and his wife. We were talking. We went preached there Sunday morning, and we went to lunch. And she was very, very, very quiet. And when I said yes, I told Brother Bernard we need to take a Sunday off. She grabbed, yes, yeah, and I was just shocked because all of a sudden just this energy came out from her. Sorry, but she realized, she was saying, and I realized how important it was. And it is true, you don't have to take 10 or 12 days, but take 8 days. Start and leave on a Friday. Miss that Sunday. Your church will survive. And if anything, it's good for them to realize that they can still have great church when pastor's gone, because that makes them think, hey, we can do this. We're a church, because they're the body of Christ. I mean, they're gonna survive. But it actually, by that third day or so, the minister is able to pull away. Especially when he hears a report that one got baptized. Oh man, I hate I wasn't the one baptizing, but it's great. They survived without us. Oh man, they survived without us. Do they need us? All those thoughts. But after that third or fourth day, you can really begin to rest before you have to gear up. I mean, when you take an 8 or 9 day vacation, I think it's huge success if you have 3 days that you're actually resting. Really, because you take 3 days to unwind. And then when you're coming in, getting ready for Sunday, by the following Thursday or Friday, you're gearing up again. Your mind, your heart, your emotions are gearing up again. So I think it's very healthy and very vital to get away on off of at least one Sunday.
You know, I had a rule of thumb when I was pastoring. I'm not saying everybody has to have that, but we were growing church the whole time, so we were in a building program the whole time. So there was always something special going on. But I just set a rule of thumb that I would miss 5 Sundays a year, 10%. So I missed 3. I did a lot of missions trips. So I did 3 Sundays were overseas trips, and as I said, a lot of times we would take at least a day or 2, or maybe a little more vacation. So it wasn't always just missions, but I would reserve 3 Sundays for missions trips, 1 Sunday for general conference. At that time, many times conference over Sunday, but even if it's not, take an extra day or 2, and then 1 Sunday would be our annual family vacation. So I used that as 10% rule of thumb, 5 Sundays, and I told the church that because I wanted to be accountable to the church, but also I wanted to model for them. And I would say, I know can be a lot of pressure to have everybody show up at every service, and you hate a down Sunday, you hate people leaving at summer, you hate holiday times, but I learned, look, this is life. So here's what I started telling the church. Look, I'm going to take off 5 Sundays a year. If you're volunteering, like you have a role in the church, I'm asking you to do the same approximately. 10% is reasonable, but if you're going to be a Sunday school teacher, we don't need you taking, 1 Sunday a month out of town. We need you to be faithful. But I would say if it's a holiday time, I understand. Many of you will be traveling. Others will be having family in town, and you're trying to maximize your time. Look, we're going to have church for those who need it and want it. They're going to be visitors from out of town. They're going to be first-time visitors in the community that will come because it's a holiday. But I know if you need to be gone for a holiday, I understand that. I'm not pressuring you. And I would say that for the pulpit. Well, we might have less attendance, but you know what I discovered? Our services were much better. Some of our best services the whole year. Why? Because everybody was there, wanted to be there. And they were saying, well, this is a special time. I want to get something spiritual tonight. Instead of saying, oh, well, I have to be there or the pastor's going to be mad at me. And it made a big difference in our actual services. And also it gave people freedom. I've learned this. When you give people a little freedom, they're going to be more faithful when you ask them to make commitments. But when you're asking commitments all the time, you burn people out, and people get cynical as well.
You're removing the guilt factor from them, too, so they don't feel guilty when they have to leave church. You give them permission to have that family time, then they're gonna want to be there.
Yes, because you probably found out most people are going to do what they want to do anyway, no matter what you say. So if it's a matter of holiness, obviously you have to stand your ground. If it's a matter of doctrine, stand your ground. But otherwise, it's sometimes better to go ahead and give in and make them feel good instead of oppose them and make them feel guilty. So either they're going to do it and feel guilty, or they're going to do it and feel better, which means they're going to be more likely to cooperate with everything else. So, it's like it's all of life. It's even though you're the leader, whether you're the husband or the father or the pastor or the mom, you have to hold people lightly. You can't hold them tightly. And you lead by example. You lead by influence. You lead by love. You lead by serving. You lead by example. You're not asking them to do anything that you're not doing. And what you'll find is people be much more faithful. So whether it's your own wife or your kids or your saints, when you lead that way, you'll actually get a much higher level of commitment and cooperation than if you lead in an authoritarian way. So anything else? Did I cut you off, or is there anything else you wanted to say? Okay, maybe we've got time for one more question? Yes.